then we can then have it readily available for you on the Industry Needs You site, hopefully by the end of the week. Today I have with me not only Sue Watson, but Jerica Johnson, who is a project support for this staff for this project. She's going to do some assisting today. I'm going to ask that everybody please put their phone on mute until a time when you want to participate or you have something that you want to ask. It usually is pretty free-flowing the way that we have this work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to call on Jerica to go ahead and do the roll call. So she'll say your name and you can let us know that you're here, and then at the end we'll ask for anybody's name that we didn't call.
Jerica. Nicole Huber. Okay. Sharon Coleman or Michelle.
Yes, I'm here. Hi.
Vic Zent. Trisha Myers.
Here.
Danielle Landerman. Melissa Clyde. Kyle Corrali.
Here.
Lisa Zavara. Lynn Leach.
I'm here.
Denise Villanueva. Harold Heibach.
Here.
Erin McCracken.
Here.
Ed Leach.
Here.
Dale Forrester. Taylor Yawn. Tammy Anderson. Sherry Schubert.
I'm here.
Nikki Huber. Jessica Borza. Eric Carmacy.
Here.
Marianne Billette.
I'm here.
And Alicia Demore, what company are you representing today?
Executool Precision Tooling.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And is there anybody else that I didn't call your name?
Thank you. Thanks, Jerica. So this is what our agenda is going to include for today. We'll go over very quickly the webinars for employers' purpose. We do that every time. And then we'll look at the grant reimbursement process. I'll do a very quick overview of the grant paperwork process, which leads to then the paperwork for the grant reimbursement, the master agreement and addendum, which are key to your reimbursement, as well as the AI invoice. And then we'll talk about the documents for reimbursement, RTI, OJT, or OJL. And we'll do some sharing, and then we'll have a Q&A, and then we'll talk about the subjects that were chosen for the upcoming webinars. So as you may recall, and we go through this every time we have a webinar, we talk about why it is we do the webinars for employers. So basically it's to keep the lines of communication open, to allow for the opportunity for us to learn best practices from one another, to be proactive in the Department of Labor compliance record keeping, and then ultimately to provide the best opportunities for apprentices' success. There's going to be quite a bit of context here, so don't hesitate to ask questions, or if there are things that I'm going through that you don't believe you have right now that you would like to have access to, please let me know so we can get some things to you. So this first slide is the grant reimbursement process. You may recall, some of you, we've done this verbally, some of you have actually gone through the packet. The packet looks something like this. It starts with this page and it has about 5 pages to it. It tells you what the steps are for participating in the grant itself. And so the paperwork process walks you through, and you'll be familiar with this, all the steps that are involved for both you and your apprentice to be involved in. And it talks about things if you're giving prior credit and there's paperwork to be turned in. And it also addresses things that have to do with the agreement itself and acceptance and that kind of thing. But once we get down to step number 5, this is where we really start talking about the grant reimbursement itself. And this is where West Central Job Partnership comes in. We're really fortunate today that Eric Carmacy was able to be on a line with us because he'll be able to walk us through a number of things if there are questions that I'm not comfortable answering or I may not have the answer to. And you know that Eric is the person that the MVMC, we actually acting as a sponsor, and then some of you doing the traditional ones yourself, but everything does end up going to Eric. So, you know, we draw upon that registration and master agreement and the agreement to the employer for your review and signature, and then everything really does go to Eric, and then he feeds information to us that we need for records and that kind of thing. So the addendum to the master agreement is something that we're going to go over, and then we'll also go over the invoice template because we think and we know that that's going to be instrumental for you and being able to put everything through to us. The grant reimbursement process itself, you're going to recognize it. It looked like this. So it goes on the employer letterhead, and usually Eric will pre-populate, or he does pre-populate this for you with your information. What I wanted to point out, you know, this packet has a number of pages to it, but what I wanted to go over with you today is on page 8, number 32 says the payment method. This actually walks through how you'll receive your payments. And so it tells you about how the method, the way that we have done this is that it takes a year for you to get your full reimbursement. It's in 2 6-month halves. And so this walks through what some of that looks like, and it also talks about what you provide to West Central Job Partnership. So if you're unfamiliar, you may want to step back and look at page 8 of your master agreement, and it has all of this information on it. So the process itself, if you look at the addendum, it really helps you understand what it is that's being covered by the grant and what it is you're allowed to submit. So I'll give you a little bit of detail on what the paperwork is that you're submitting, but I wanted to go through this just so that everybody understands what's eligible for the training costs. So we're talking about the related technical instruction. That's what your apprentices are going through at the educational institution. So those are costs that are allowable, as well as the on-the-job learning or on-the-job training, which has to do with your supervisor or mentor for the apprentices. And so this gives you a little bit of information as to the definition of those eligible training costs, just as a reminder. And these are things that we typically go over with you when we first start talking to you about the grant itself. And again, this is unique per apprentice. This is something that Eric puts together for you as well when he sends the master agreement and the addendum to you. So on page 3 of your addendum, that's where you see the payment schedule and the invoicing. And this is what I was telling you about as far as how often you get your payments, that it's put into 2 halves. And so then you submit your evidence or your documentation that those expenses have been incurred by the employer in 2 6-month installments to be able to get your full reimbursement. So Eric has put together an invoice for you to be able to utilize to fill in those blanks and to be able to attach all your evidence and documentation. And that looks like this form right here. And you can see that along the right side of it, there are actually spaces for you to put all the dollar amounts in. And he's done a really nice job of actually pulling apart what those individual expenses may be. You may not have something for every one of the lines. Sometimes some companies do. It just all depends on how extensive they are. But what I wanted to go over with you is what those documents are for reimbursement that you should be submitting along with these dollar amounts. So this is what you should be submitting for RTI. You should be submitting copies of the third-party invoices, which are proof of payment, and all the credentials earned. So those should all be your backup documentation for those dollar amounts that you're putting in on the form that I just had on the screen. And then your on-the-job training and on-the-job learning is your supervisor's or mentor's payroll report that should be provided as backup documentation for that piece of the invoice. The other thing that we don't talk as much about, which is just as important, is the indirect cost. So by providing the apprentice's payroll report, that backup documentation actually allows us to be able to talk about leveraged funds and those types of things for the grant, which are always vitally important. Anytime that you get a grant, it's always good to be able to show how things are being leveraged and what's being utilized to leverage. So those indirect costs help with that, and it allows us to be able to show that the employers are putting leveraged funds into supporting what's happening with the grant. And one of the things that I wanted to go over is that although this is not required for your reimbursement, it is required for the grant. And this side note I wanted to go over because there are apprenticeship documents that we are required to keep in our office, and this is for the Department of Labor record compliance. This is checked by the state periodically, so when they come in, they're going to be looking for certain things, and so what we have is we have a checklist that we use, and it would have the apprentice's name on it and the employer, and then we actually go through and we mark down when we receive certain pieces of documentation. So as I said a few minutes ago, everything goes to Eric Harmacy. And so Eric Harmacy is going to have a majority, if not all, of the information we need, but we may still need to come back to you for documentation that's missing. So sometimes there are things that the state may require us to have that maybe Eric has not received from the employer that we may be coming back to you for. So what you'll find is that usually in 6-month increments, what we're going to do through Watson, will come to you and say, we may need additional pieces of information. And so don't be surprised if there are certain things that she's asking for, because we need to fill those in each one of the apprentices folders to make sure that we're being compliant. So at this time, what I'd like to do, I'm going to ask everybody to think about maybe sharing what their experience has been or what they think has worked well from them. But I wanted to call on Eric to maybe talk about what he has seen as maybe either challenges or even some best practices in what he's received from some of our employers. So Eric, if you can share with us, that would be helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Vicki. First off, I just want to thank all of the employers who've sort of bared with us throughout this process. It's been sort of a learning process for us as well. What we've tried to do from the beginning is make this as seamless and easy as possible. But as Vicki mentioned, these are federal dollars and taxpayer supported funding, and so we are audited and monitored by the Federal Department of Labor through the Employment and Training Administration quite frequently. And what they've always wanted to see here is to make sure that we have a sound process for accountability of how we're structuring the reimbursements. And unfortunately, the amount of funding that we're able to supply pales in comparison to what you, our companies, are investing in each one of these apprentices. So in terms of the amount of funding that we're reimbursing, it's a drop in the bucket compared to what you guys obviously are investing from your end. So as Vicki mentioned, the biggest thing that we've seen so far is, have been some questions with regard to how we go about completing the invoice process. And it's been sort of a mixed bag. We've got some companies that sort of figure it out pretty quickly and get us all the information, sometimes submitted literally the last day of the 6-month period that they're eligible for. Some others we've had to sort of track down and encourage you to to submit invoicing. Usually we'll wait till you're about 2 to 4 weeks behind, and then you'll hear from either us or a member of the MVMC team, that reminds you that an invoice is due at either that 6-month or 12-month period. And again, that's something that we wanted to structure to make it as easy as possible to front load the full reimbursement during the apprentice's first year. As Vicki noted, some of these can go 4 years in duration, but we didn't want to have to make an employer wait 4 years to recover that initial investment or a portion of that initial investment. So the biggest thing from where we sit in terms of making sure that we're getting, that we're accountable, as I mentioned, to ETA, is that we can show and demonstrate the cost that you guys have invested, not just the cost that we're offering in reimbursement, but really a big picture of what all of your costs are as you sponsor a new apprentice. And so the RTI piece, the related technical instruction, is probably the easiest piece. Obviously, there's a third-party trainer involved there. It's pretty cut and dry. You get an invoice from that provider with the costs, and you go ahead and incorporate that into the RTI section. Some of the bigger questions that we have seen come with the OJL piece. Each employer sort of has a different way of tracking the amount of time that the supervisor or mentor is spending with their apprentice. I know a number of companies sort of create an estimate. 20% of the mentor's time seems to be one that I often see companies estimating that supervisor or mentor during the first year is spending about 20% of their time with direct instruction with each apprentice. And so we just ask that whatever the employer's methodology is, that you stay consistent and true to that methodology, and you use that in the OJL or OJT section of your invoice to calculate those costs based on the percentage or the real hours of instruction that the mentor or supervisor is spending with the apprentice. So however many hours those are times the wage and benefit rate, if there's ever a question, or if it's ever, some employers, for example, don't have a direct calculation for the benefit rate and just go strictly with the wage, which is fine. As long as, like I said, as long as we're doing, we're being consistent from one apprentice to the next. But that OJL piece is really important. Even if you've exceeded your reimbursed amount through the RTI, we also want to see the OJL or OJT component built in there. And I'm actually looking at an invoice right now from an employer that was eligible for $2,000 in a 6-month range and submitted an invoice for RTI of $1,950 and called it a day. So essentially, we're going to short them $50 if we don't get their OJL expenses. But this is an employer that I'm going to be contacting to see if we can get them to provide us with the OJL piece for 2 reasons. One, so that we can get them to that maximum $2,000, and 2, because we want to be able to show and demonstrate to the grantor what the total investment of these employers are. And then the final piece on the invoice would be, as Vicki mentioned, the indirect costs. So the training that you're offering through your mentor or supervisor, the technical instruction through a third-party classroom training or virtual learning, those are one thing, but you're also paying a wage to the apprentice while they train. And while that wage is not eligible for reimbursement through this grant, we do have, we again want to show leveraged funds. Again, big picture, what the employer's total investment is. And our goal is, for doing so, number one is we were required to do this when we wrote the original proposal. But also, this would help us to maybe go after additional funding at some point down the road. If we can show that our employers invested a whole lot more than we offered them, then maybe we'd be more apt to receive additional funding in the future. So we want to make sure that we're painting a clear picture of what your investment is as an employer there, conservatively speaking. So we're trying to sort of bridge the gap between, making this not too burdensome for you from a reporting standpoint, but also wanting to make sure that we're capturing, the full investment that you guys are making for each of these apprentices. I'll say this, that typically if we receive the process for receiving the reimbursement request, assuming everything's in order when we receive that, and we can receive them electronically. In terms of the contracts, we actually need original copies of those, which everyone has been sending through the mail. But just to capture your invoice, we actually do not need hard copies of those. So that's something that you're welcome to send electronically. And what we do is we review that pretty quickly, make sure that you have in fact completed all 3 sections and supplied the appropriate documentation to support those costs, at which point we will process a request to our finance department for payment. If I receive and review your invoice by noon on a Tuesday, the check is cut and mailed the following Friday. So never should payment take any more than 2 weeks to arrive, as long as we have everything in order. Now, like I said, the one I'm looking at right now, I've got to make a call back to the employer and see if we can get them to resubmit to include those other costs. So this one may be a little delayed, but if everything's here, you'll receive your reimbursement check within 2 weeks. The only other thing, and I think I mentioned it earlier, and I know our employers are busy. This may be one of the item number 50 on the priority list. So if you do forget to invoice us, that's what we're here for. We'll be reaching out to you between myself and our friends at MVMC and TPMA. You do have, we're contracted to provide you the money. I've had some employers ask, oh my goodness, I forgot, this is 3 months past due, are you still going to pay? Of course, we're going to honor that. If we were not able to honor it, we would provide you ample notice in advance of that. When we do get down to the end of the road here next year, the grant ends September 2020. So we will have a grant closeout period, which will probably extend through the end of the calendar year 2020, at which point beyond that we will not be able to reimburse employers. But hopefully that'll be a non-issue. As I said, at the 2 to 4 week period is where we really start sending emails or making calls to remind you that your invoice is due.
Thank you, Eric. That was really helpful. And so if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask. What I wanted to do is maybe if we could get some sharing. I know that Eric actually sent me an email telling me that he thought that Brilux was doing a really nice job with their submittal. So I was wondering, Mary Ann, can you maybe share, just so people can understand, what is it that you're providing as your backup documentation for your reimbursement?
Sure. So I can tell you that we haven't really done the reimbursement on the welder fitter program yet, but we have used the machinist, and we were provided like a checklist of what was expected of each apprentice. And so that was given to each of the mentors to use as a guide as they were going through the process. So that is one piece that we have been using as like on-the-job training or on-the-job learning as a tool there. And then I know I've made copies of the pay stubs of our employees, or the apprentice itself, and then the mentor as backup. I mean, really, the invoice is very self-explanatory. It walks you right through the process. It's really not as bad as it seems. The one good part is I was always the one that thought we needed to mail it, so it's nice to hear that I can now send this information electronically, and Eric will get it a lot quicker. So, yeah, I try to put it all together and you know, I print the pay stubs as I get them, you know, as the weeks go by, so that I'm not trying to print, you know, 6 months worth of pay stubs, you know, at one time. But I print my apprentice out after each payroll so that I have those. But I really think the most important part is the checklist that was given to us for the machinist, because I feel like that keeps the hours accounted for, so how much time the mentor is spending with the apprentice, it keeps that on track, and it's something simple to calculate back into. And then, of course,
Hey,
the only thing, yeah.
It's Ryan, other side of Brilex on the other end of the building. Do we have checklists for fitter welder, or I guess maybe this is for Vicki Thompson and everybody, do we have checklists for the fitter welders and industrial mill maintenance so that we can put those with their mentors in the shop? Because right now we're not doing that with that group of apprentice.
You know, we'll look into that. I know that there are some employers that have their own checklist. We can even ask about sharing. But I will say that if anybody needs the machinist checklist, we can get that to you. Just let us know. And then we do have one for industrial maintenance as well. We use the cars, the NIMS cars for that. Welder fitter, I believe we had employers who were utilizing their own, but we can reach out to those employers and share those with anybody that wants those. So Ryan, we can make sure that we get those to you.
That would be great, because that I think is very helpful for the guys that are actually out there mentoring. They kind of have something to go by. I know that the machinist one has been really pretty much a useful tool for us. But the one final thing that I would say, the biggest part is working with accounting to get the invoices. That's the only part that I actually don't really have struggle with, but you know, that's what I'm preparing at the end of that process to submit that invoice, is making sure that I have copies of the invoices for the coursework that they're doing. That would be the biggest, but it's not as bad as it may seem up front.
Thank you, Marianne. That's really helpful for us to the information.
You're welcome.
Does anybody else have anything that they want to share as far as what's working really well for them, as far as submitting and paperwork? Or Eric, I don't know if you also had, you know, some other success stories you think are working well.
No, I mean, I've by and large, I haven't seen too many problems. I've heard from a number of employers. You know, when they're doing it for the first time, sometimes they'll pick up the phone and give me a call. We'll just, you know, we'll walk through that process together. I'm more than happy to do that for anybody at any point in the process here. Just, you know, we can communicate and walk you through. So hopefully everybody would have my contact information, and we can offer that. But I'm sitting here on another one I just got from Bird Equipment. That's phenomenal. I mean, everything's thorough, and it was handwritten. I could read it. So, I mean, it's, yeah. I mean, I think by and large, everybody's doing a really nice job, and appreciate the patience that you guys have offered us through this process as well.
Thanks, Eric. Does anybody have any questions or concerns that have to do with the paperwork process? Well, the biggest reminder here is just to make sure that you complete all the applicable sections for invoicing. And as Eric has gone through, they're all important because we want to make sure that we're not only providing you with the reimbursement that the grant allows for, but that you're also able to share, what it is that you're providing as far as some of your apprentices' expenses. So those instructions, again, they're offered within the AI invoice, and I will make sure that even though we don't have it on the slide itself on the PowerPoint, we'll make sure that when we post this to Industry Needs You, that we also have Eric's contact information with the PowerPoint, so that if there are some of you who want to reach out to him directly, you can do that as well. But Eric's always readily available, and he's able to answer, any of the questions that you may have about reimbursement, your master agreement, and your addendum. Are there any other questions?
It's Mary Ann again at Brilex. I have just one for Eric. We submitted, and I'm not sure if it made it to you yet or not. We had a late enrollee in the program, the welder fitter program, Dan Fumarola. I don't have a master agreement on him at all yet.
Well, the master agreement should just be a one-time, and unless your company has changed locations or we only collect the master agreement one time. Then we have an addendum to the master agreement. Are you referring to the addendum?
Yes, that's what I meant. Yes.
Okay. And what was his last name?
Fumarola. Fumerola.
Let me look into that, Marion. I'll see where we are on that.
Yeah, he was a late enrollee in January. So.
Okay.
I'm going to give you a little update on that one. That happened to be an apprentice who lost his OSHA card. This is a nice discussion on prior credit. So he already earned his OSHA card, but he can't produce it. So I went back to the education provider who's looking to see if they can get, apparently the way OSHA cards work is you're allowed to get one extra copy, and that's it. So the education provider is looking into that for us, and so that's our holdup right now. But it is an interesting, to see how one piece of documentation can hold things up. But that's what's happening with that right now, Marianne. I'm sorry, I thought we gave you an update on that, but we're waiting for his OSHA card.
Okay.
And if you submit that to me and tell me an OSHA card's coming, we'll go ahead and process the payment. That's no problem.
Oh, perfect. Okay, great. Thank you. We will do that. Does anybody have any other questions before I move on? We, based on the doodle poll results, we'd ask all of you to give us some ideas as to what you would like our next two topics. We have 2 more webinars left, and what you would be interested in having those addressed. And these are the 2 that had the most votes. Apprenticeship selection assessments. And this came out of a webinar that we had a couple months ago when we talked about how to use apprenticeship as a hiring or a recruitment tool. And we started talking about assessments, and so there's some good discussion about who uses assessments and what type of assessments are used. Those are the kind of questions that came up. So we thought we would take some time and actually address that in a webinar. So thinking about those of you who are using assessments for selection, what you're using, how you're using it, and then how that relates to you being able to have good retention for your apprentices. So that's one topic, and then the other one was Partners for Success. So who are the partners that are necessary to have a successful apprenticeship program, and how you can utilize information and possibly funding from different sources for sustainability. So that will be another topic that we'll have as well. So that will be in June. Yep. So our next one will be in June. And Sue will get information to you. And as I said, this is being recorded, so you'll be able to find this on the Industry Needs You website by the end of the week. And if there are no other questions, I want to thank you for your time, and thank Jerica for doing roll call for us and being on the call today. Learn a little bit more about how this all works, and a special thank you to Eric for his knowledge and sharing his practices with us so that we can better understand how we can be better in submitting information. So thanks, everybody, and have a great afternoon.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.